In this video, we're going to explore various techniques that can be used to create powerful imagery. Now keep in mind that these techniques are often used along with the wordcraft conceptual and structural techniques that you have already learned in our previous lessons. I believe that creating potent imagery to communicate profound ideas in a few well-crafted sentences is one of the best indicators of poetic prowess. So, without further ado, let's explore some of these techniques. Imagery. Imagery means to use figurative language to represent objects, actions, and ideas in such a way that it appeals to our physical senses. This is perhaps the most powerful feature of a poem. The function of imagery is to generate a vibrant and graphic representation of a scene that appeals to as many of the reader's senses as possible. It aids the reader's imagination to envision the characters and scenes in the literary piece clearly. Images drawn by using figures of speech like metaphor, simile, personification, onomatopoeia serve the function of beautifying a piece of literature. For example, when we say it was dark and dim in the forest, dark and dim are visual images. The children were screaming and shouting in the fields, where screaming and shouting appeal to our sense of hearing. He whiffed the aroma of brewed coffee. Whiff and aroma evoke our sense of smell. The girl ran her hands on a soft satin fabric. The idea of soft in this example appeals to our sense of touch. The fresh and juicy orange is very cold and sweet. Juicy, sweet, cold, when associated with oranges, have an effect on our sense of taste. Atmosphere. This refers to the emotions or feelings that an author conveys to their readers through the description of objects and settings. It refers to a type of feeling that the reader gets from a narrative based on the details that you provide. H.P. Lovecraft was one of the most atmospheric writers of all time. Just by reading the titles of his novels and short stories, you can tell what kind of atmosphere he was trying to create. At the Mountains of Madness, The Crawling Chaos, The Dunwich Horror, The Whisperer in the Darkness. Even without knowing anything at all about these stories, you know exactly what kind of atmosphere they'll have. Another example is this passage from Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher. And it's a highly atmospheric line, and it's the opening of this famous short story. And you notice how Poe uses a string of carefully chosen words, especially adjectives and adverbs, to create a heavy, foreboding atmosphere for his story. Enumeration is a technique where you go about listing details or a process using words or phrases to describe something step by step. In fact, it is a type of amplification in which a subject is divided into its components or parts. You can use this to elaborate or elucidate a topic and make it understandable. Or you can also use it to build layers of different visuals and perspectives about a particular topic. The most obvious example that comes to mind is the poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Ways. In this poem, she enumerates a whole lot of reasons as to why she loves someone, how she loves someone, and thereby she's able to show the depth and profoundness of that love. Another example is the poem Elegy for Jane, in which the speaker recalls how Jane, a dead student, looked, and he gives details by remembering various aspects of her person, like her smile, her hair, and her beautiful spirit, and he enumerates on them one by one. Inference. Now, this is a rather clever technique that readers can use to interpret a text. Unlike the other literary devices that we've been talking about, this is one that is primarily used by the reader. However, the writer does have a role to play in creating opportunities for readers to practice inference. It basically refers to the observation of facts that are presented in a particular pattern. One ultimately sees different or new interpretations and perspectives while exploring a text. Inference is a very important part of the reading experience. Authors rely on the ability of readers to use inference to understand the symbolism, metaphors, themes, and underlying meaning in a text. And readers find that the experience of going through a text infinitely richer if they are able to use skills of inference to understand what has been presented. For example, Robert Frost's famous poem, The Road Not Taken, asks the reader to infer his meaning about what the two roads symbolize. Frost finishes the poem with the lines, "I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." The reader is asked to think about what this means in his or her own life and decide which road he or she has taken or should take in a particular context. Intertextuality. Now, while this is a very sophisticated literary device, it simply means using a textual reference of a particular text in your work. Instead of just employing referential phrases from different literary works, intertextuality draws upon the concept, the rhetoric, or ideology from other writings to be merged into the new text. Now, some of you may think that this sounds quite similar to an allusion. Well, an allusion is a kind of intertextuality. It is a brief and concise reference that a writer uses referring to a particular aspect or a particular instance from another text. Intertextuality, on the other hand, uses the reference of a full story or a full concept in another text as its backbone. For example, apart from allusion, intertextuality can take the form of parody, wherein you imitate or mock the original text to create satire or to encourage readers to ask new questions. Intertextuality can take the form of a quotation, which is a direct reference to words from another text with acknowledgement of its original author. It can be in the form of an appropriation, wherein you reimagine a well-known text to change its meaning. Or it can take the form of an adaptation, where you rewrite a text for a different medium or a time period. While intertextuality is seen in its full glory in prose, I think it can be used quite effectively in poetry and songwriting. For example, one can observe the intertextual nature of references to William Blake and his numerous works and the ideas within those works in the poems of Allen Ginsberg. In the poem that you see on the screen, the words that are capitalized are direct references to words and ideas from poems by William Blake, thereby adding new layers of meaning and avenues for interpretation. An example of intertextuality in novels would be James Joyce's Ulysses, which is a deliberate retelling of Homer's Odyssey, but transplanted out of ancient Greek and into modern-day Dublin. Onomatopoeia is a literary technique where one uses words that imitate the natural sounds of a thing. It creates a sound effect that mimics the thing that's being described, and this makes the description more expressive and interesting. This is used quite effectively when you're trying to create imagery and to create visuals, because it gives a lot more emphasis to the idea that you're trying to communicate. When you say the bee flew away versus the buzzing bee flew away, you notice that the onomatopoeic word allows you to imagine in greater detail the scene that the writer is trying to describe. Other examples can be the sack fell into the river with a splash, the books fell on the table with a loud thump, the rustling leaves kept me awake. Kinesthesia. Now, this is a poetic device that gives a feeling of natural or physical bodily movement or action, like heartbeat or pulse, breathing. It refers to the tension that comes with movement. Since the word kinetic means motion or movement, kinesthetic imagery is the representation of the actions and movements of the object of your text. For example, in Wordsworth's I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, he says, 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance, where sprightly creates the visual or the imagery of the kind of motion that the subject is engaging in. Kinesthesia can refer to the motion of touch, like running fingers on fabric. It can refer to the movement of, like, physical movement, like walking on grass or wading in the water. Kinesthesia can also refer to the movement and tension around temperature. For example, the way that molten glass moves or the way that sunlight falls over a body. It can refer to the movement of feelings, like internal feelings like being angry, sad, happy, peaceful, or calm, and describing the movement of emotions inside a person. Another example of kinesthetic imagery is from the poem Hyperion by Keats, where he tries to create an awareness of muscle tension and movement of the character, and he beautifully describes a sense of muscular agony and feelings of exhaustion when he says, "At this, through all his bulk and agony crept gradual from the feet unto the crown, like a lithe serpent, vast and muscular, making slow way, with head and neck convulsed, from overstrained might," and so on he goes. Synesthesia. Now, this is a figurative use of words that intend to draw a response from the readers by stimulating multiple senses at the same time, and this can be used to create some very powerful imagery. For example, in Inferno, Dante describes a place by saying, "Back to the region where the sun is silent." Here, Dante binds the sense of sight, referring to the sun, with the sense of hearing, silence. And by bringing the two together, he's able to describe the place in an extremely and profoundly beautiful way. He says the sun is silent. In Ode to a Nightingale, Keats writes, "Tasting of flora and the country green, dance and Provençal song, and sunburnt myth." In the above example, Keats combines a visual sensation with sensations of taste and hearing. Generally, the term synesthesia refers to a medical condition in which one of the five senses stimulates a response from another sense, which means that someone could hear a song and when they hear the song, instead of hearing the notes of the song, they actually are able to see some form of color. And in songwriting, the writers use this technique to communicate complex ideas and emotions through color. And one very simple, famous example is the song Yellow by Coldplay, where he describes he enumerates various aspects of unrequited love by saying that it was all yellow.